Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Sage 300 Payroll Quarterly Review. My name is Jeanette, and I'll be your instructor this morning for the next hour. Before we get started, just a reminder that there are two handouts that are included in on the panel of the GoToMeeting invitation. There is a PDF file that has the material that we're going to cover. It's called Sage Payroll Quarterly Review. And then the PowerPoint that we're going to be looking at today is also included in the handouts section of the GoToWebinar panel. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started then. Our agenda for today, we're going to talk about some things that you need to be aware of before you start the quarter end. We're going to take a look at some tax preparation reports. We're going to take a look at what could cause the reports not to have the amounts that you're expecting to show up for each employee. And if we find a problem with those amounts, we're going to take a look at the Recalculate Subject to program that will allow us to rebuild those dollar amounts based on the checks that have been entered to the employee. We'll also look at some other error correction kind of tips. And then we're going to briefly get into Atrix and look at printing the quarterly reports, first by state, and then the federal quarterly forms. All right, so the first thing, you want to make sure that everything that you have for the quarter has been entered and posted. I would verify through inquiry, check information, check activity, look at the new file, and make sure that any checks dated within the quarter that need to be posted, you get those posted. And then any manual checks that you may have written during the quarter, those need to be recorded through tasks, inner checks, and then again, those also need to be posted so that your totals for the employee are correct. The next thing I would do is make sure that you back up your payroll files. Even though you are backing up maybe nightly with some form of operating system backup utility, I would go ahead and use tools, file tools, and make a backup of your PRM file, master.prm, and your current.prt. If you are waiting to close the quarter, or if you have corrections that you have to make to those files, just in case something goes wrong, you can always go back and restore those files back to where they were before you started. The next thing I would do is verify the version that you're on. The current supported version for right now is 17.1 and 18.1 or 2, depending on whether or not you've upgraded to the latest version. Now, to check that, all you need to do is go into the application or TS Main or Sage Desktop and go to Help About. And that's going to show you right up here at the top what your version is. So as long as you are on 17.1 or 18.1 or 2, then you've got the most current version with the most current records, and anything that you're printing through Sage, you've got the most current files or designs. Okay. I need to back to the screen. Okay. Now, as far as preparation reporting, and actually the screenshot that I just showed you, that's on page 1 of the handout. The preparation reports, there is a 941 preparation report and a quarterly employee count. These run off the transaction files. There is also a totals report, a subject to employee, employer, and then another report that we can run if you've already closed the month but you haven't started to run any of your quarterly reports. So I'm going to jump back into the software here. Get back into Payroll. Okay, and let's take a look at some of these reports. So under the reports, and you want to go to tax preparation, the 941 preparation report is located here. And on this one, you can give it a check date from and to. And I'm just going to do a print preview here. This is going to show you totals by month for each of your federal taxes. So taxable, federal withholding tax itself, Social Security subject to, Medicare totals, and then the taxes withheld, employer, employee, and then your total tax liability. So this is one report that I would recommend that you run once you have everything entered into the system for the quarter. Okay. And again, this is under reports, tax preparation, and it's called 941. Now the other one that's under here, we've got the quarterly employee count. So if your state requires that you enter in the number of employees that worked in the quarter, and I'm just going to do, this is, I'm using the sample data, so it's a little bit older here. Let me see if Oregon has a list of what that looks like. It does. So on page 3 in your handout, this is the employee count report so that you can get a total if you have to provide that on your reports. And then it'll give you a count by month. Okay. Now, if you need to run subject to reports, and actually you should be running subject to reports, there is a subject to employee, employer. This will run on the current quarter, current year. And so let's just go ahead and we'll just run this. It's going to give you a list by employee. These are the employer taxes. So the tax ID is listed, a description is over here on the left-hand side, and then it lists through all the employees, and it does it by tax. Okay. If you're looking at the employee, this is also here. Okay, so this is showing us the federal taxes first for the the employee portion, gross taxable and tax, and then it will go through the state taxes, and then lastly, it'll do any local taxes that you may have withheld from employees. So it does it in both those reports. It does it in order: federal tax first, then the state taxes, and then the local taxes. Okay, now, what if you find that something on this report is incorrect? How do we troubleshoot that? One of the first things that I'll have people look for is any new deductions that they've set up either during the year or the quarter. And I will have you check down below here what those new deductions may be exempt from. A common mistake is a 401k that is tax exempt, and when it was initially set up, it wasn't marked at the bottom of the screen to take the deduction out before certain taxes are calculated. So that's one common mistake that people will make. A second common error will be when an employee has been set up and they have an adjustment to the tax that's being calculated. Usually it's either federal withholding or state withholding. The adjustment methods, there are two that you need to be aware of because there is a difference. There's a difference between no tax and a difference between exempt. If your employee is asking for no taxes to be withheld, however, you need to report they're subject to and taxable to the government, and they need a W-2 at the end of the year, they're not exempt. You need to mark them as no tax so that the taxable and the subject to amounts will accumulate correctly, both on the check records and within the employee master file. If you mark them as exempt, then those dollar amounts will not accumulate, and what will happen then is when you run these reports, their check amounts will not be included in those two fields, subject to and taxable. Now, if you find that one of these two things has been set up incorrectly, then what you need to do is two things we need to talk about. First is using the Recalculate subject to. This is on page 6, the screenshots in your handout. So under Tools, Recalculate subject to allows you to take the checks out of either the current file or the history file and rebuild totals in the employee master file based on the checks that are there dated for that quarter. When you click OK on that, whichever file you select, it's going to ask you which year you want to recalculate. It can only do the current year or 1 year back, so it can go backwards if you need to recalculate. Let's say you have, maybe this is for the 4th quarter, and you have already closed the year. So instead of recalculating to 2020, you need to recalculate 2019, and that's going to show up here under prior year. If you only have the one current or history file, you need to check the box to clear taxable and subject to period totals. Otherwise, it will double up the amounts that are on the employee record. So if you forget to check that box, and then you run this, you forget to check, and then you run reports afterwards, and you see that your amounts are doubled, don't panic. Try not to panic. You can run this again. You can run this task as many times as you need to. Just run it again, and this time check the box, and it will zero those amounts out, and it will rebuild them based again on those check records. Now, what you need to remember is that this program only rebuilds taxable and subject to amounts. It does not recalculate the actual tax. So if you need to change the tax amount, what you'll need to do is record a dummy manual check. And so what you'll do there then is come in under Tasks and go into Enter Checks. And what you'll do, usually it's an employer tax that you're trying to correct. If it's an employee tax, we'll talk about that in just a moment. For the employer tax, you'll click into the tax box, and then down below, the tax button becomes a toggle between employee tax, you see the E on the end here, and employer tax, you see the R on the end. You just simply click, and it switches the box over to an employer tax field. And here's where you can enter in whatever the tax ID is, and then the amount. If you're adding, you'll put in a flat amount, or you put the dollars and cents in. If you are subtracting, to a negative, and that will reduce the tax on the employee. Now, the reason that we can do this on the employer tax like this is because we can record dummy manual checks that are zero. And when you're adjusting an employer tax, the net amount of your check is zero. So just double verify here that the check net is zero or blank. And then you should be able to go ahead and assign a dummy manual check number to it and a date that's within the correct quarter. All right, so that's how you're going to correct an employer tax. If it's an employee tax, it actually depends. You can add additional tax to their next check. If you're going to give them it depends on if you're giving them a credit or you're going to take more tax from them. If you need to take more tax, you're going to have to add it to their next check. If you're going to give them a refund of it, then you can do either a dummy manual check or a direct deposit, and you can record just those employee taxes on the employee tax button here. Usually, this will get adjusted on either a second check or the next check that the employee is going to receive. Now, the one thing you do need to remember is that your Social Security and your Medicare taxes, they are self-adjusting. So they should be correct every time you process. The system will automatically verify that the year-to-date tax that exists in the master file is the correct amount for their year-to-date taxable wages that are in the master file. So on the taxes that are self-adjusting, you shouldn't have to make any corrections like this. It's just the ones that are not, like the unemployment tax, which is usually where the corrections need to come in. Okay. Now, if this is another thing that you may need to double check. If for some reason a limit was not set up correctly at the start of the year, you could end up going over if your limit has gone down. And so you run your reports and you see that some employees did not stop at the current limit. They've made enough money, but they've gone over. So this would be a case where you would come into the setup taxes and go to that unemployment tax and change your limit amount here. And potentially the percent. You may have been under withholding. So again, here, this is a case where you would run both recalculate subject to after you make the change. It corrects taxable and subject to. And then you need to find out how much over you've withheld or under withheld, and you need to correct that with a dummy manual check. Right, so this is just reminding you again about the self-adjusting taxes, that all the Social and Medicare taxes have self-adjusting formulas. They test what's been held year to date against what the employee has earned. And then I get calls every once in a while that says that Social Security and Medicare is wrong when they process the check. That's because they may have done maybe a manual check and they didn't calculate correctly, or they didn't include a tax. Something happened where the amount that should have been calculated was not correctly entered on that manual check. So the next time they process, it's going to adjust itself. All right, so again, the Recalculate Subject To program that we looked at inside the software. What happens to the data files? So when you have made a change to a pay ID or a deduction ID or the employee tax record, again, that's changing something from no tax to exempt. It changes, you're changing those IDs and you're changing the employee record, but at that point, the checks have not been changed. And most of this of what we print out inside Sage and what Atrix uses are the check records. So when you run Recalculate Subject To, it actually goes through check by check and it compares the flags on those transactions to what's setting in setup pays, setup deductions, and setup employee. And if something changed, like a 401k was marked, it was not marked as exempt before, but now it is, then that check record gets marked as that record being exempt. So that's how it then corrects the information running off the transaction file. If you make adjustments to a previous quarter, that's going to update that quarter and year to date. And then what periods of time can you use the tool? You can use this for the current file, the history file, the current year, and the prior year. Okay, so again, we can adjust prior month, prior quarter, prior year checks that exist within the current file or the history file. And then again, we can correct the current month, the current quarter, and the current year. So we should be able to correct any time frame that you need, whether it's in the current year or prior. And again, here is the screenshot of this. One of the things I didn't point out, this grayed out box right here, if you go backwards to a prior year and have to recalculate, this checkbox becomes activated, and you need to double check if you've made any changes to your tax IDs as far as limits are concerned. You need to make sure that you change those back before you run this program so that you can check this box that you verified that the tax file represents that prior year. Right, now, if you need to void a check that's already been posted, and that check needs to hit the the previous quarter. When you enter that check in with the period end date, you're going to get the screen that comes up here in the middle that is asking you about some options here, whether you want to retain it as new, meaning it sets it back up in the new.prt file so that you can make changes to it and reprocess it and reprint the check or recreate the direct deposit. It also asks you about the original accounting date and the original check date. You need to make sure that you address these two fields depending on where you are in general ledger and then whether or not you need this check to hit or affect the previous quarter if you've closed the month and that also closed the quarter. So that's what these two fields do. Use original accounting date. This is for general ledger and job cost only. Payroll uses the original check date or the check date on that check record. It doesn't use necessarily use the date that's going to GL and job cost. So if you've moved on into a new quarter, but you want this check to be voided in the prior quarter, prior month, you're going to check the box to use original check date. Otherwise, it stays unchecked, and this new check date pops in with the system date. So you can address that. You can move it into the next month if you need to, or the next quarter. Okay. All right. So at this point, you have verified that everything has been posted. You have run the tax preparation reports. You've made the corrections that you need to any pays or deductions. You've run Recalculate Subject 2. You've entered any dummy manual checks that you need to correct employer taxes. You have voided any checks that need to be voided out of that quarter, and then re-entered manual checks if you needed to reissue a check to replace the one that you're voiding. So up to this point, we've been doing everything inside Sage. So the next thing that you're going to want to do is to run your quarterly reports through Atrix. Right. Both of those tasks are located under the task dropdown. You have one for state e-filing and reporting, and one for federal e-file and reporting. When you click on either one of these, the system goes out and it verifies with Atrix that no changes have been made to any forms. So on my machine, there is an update. I haven't updated for a few weeks, so it's gone out and checked, and there are. Now, it won't let you run the forms until you update. So if you're ready to do your Atrix forms, just go ahead and say update yes. You'll get a second window, and this is on page 8 in your handout. And it wants to know if you are ready to do either an automatic, or you just want to download and you're going to update later. Or here you can continue expired, but notice what it says here. You can't file, or you can cancel. 100% of the time, you're just going to click the automatic update button. The next thing it's doing is it's going to go out and it's going to give us a list of the forms that it needs to upgrade or update. So when you get this screen with the list of forms, go ahead and hit the next button, and it will start the update. Now, when this finishes, it's not going to take me back into the Atrix program. It's actually going to give me an option to finish, and that's going to close the screen, the program. And then I'll have to go ahead and do tasks e-file again. For those of you that are brand new to Sage, one thing you need to check if you're already installed, and if you have a problem downloading, make sure that the firewall on your system is not blocking Atrix, and that's what might be the problem on my other machine, is that it's either missing something or it's being blocked. All right, so I've got us back here to the screen now where it's listed the forms, and when I hit next here, it should start updating. Here we go. Okay, and then you get the message that the update is complete. You go ahead and click Close in the bottom corner. And then now we should be able to come back under Tasks and go into State e-file and Reporting. And here's where you can use the state selection drop-down and find the state that you need to file or print the report for, and then find the report that you need to run. And I'm going to actually change this. This is Sage to the third quarter, but the year's wrong. Okay. And then once you have your period correct, if you have closed the month before you run the reports, then this quarter will be incorrect. You need to go back a quarter, make sure that you've got your current year in here, and then hit your next button. And that's going to give you your list of employees to process. And then just hit the next button again, and then generate. And that's going to go out and pull in the totals and pull up the form. Now you can run these forms or print them as many times as you need to until the dollar amounts are correct, and until you have everything corrected on the form. And you don't have to e-file. You can use the Atrix just to print the form. If you want to use the Atrix software to actually do the filing, there is a fee. But one thing that you might want to check into is the package deals that Atrix has, where you can pay so much for the year based on the number of employees that you have, and then you can run as many of these reports as you want to. I actually use the Atrix software myself for my little company. I was using a payroll service, and it was costing me hundreds of dollars, and now it costs me about $75 for the entire year. And I even do my tax deposits with Atrix. So it's very affordable. Instead of you having to go online and enter all the stuff back in, you can let Atrix file the form for you. I mean, after you correct all of the red, everything on the pages has to be corrected. And then once you do that, you hit the save, and you can print your form, and then use the next button to move through until you get, let me get back over here to my pages. On page 11 in your handout, on the bottom screenshot, it gives you a screen that asks you to make sure that everything is corrected and that you print a copy for yourself. And then when you click OK, everything is filled out on page 12. And then at the bottom, you just hit the next button again right there and go through. Switch now over to page 13. If you click the Agree button, if you are going to go ahead and e-file, click the Agree, and then you'll get the screen on the bottom of page 13 where there's a button there for you to e-file. Now you do have to be registered with Atrix, and they should have all your company information on file so that they can send out or email or e-file your forms for you. Right. Now each state is going to have a different form, but all of the federal will be the same. So if we look at the federal e-filing, and if we go down to the 2019, you'll see the 941. Actually, I don't want there's no totals. Let me go here. Okay, I can generate. And again, you'll see your 941. Make sure that you correct, again, anything that is in red. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and put in, okay, D8. Okay. And then this one happens to have 2 pages, so make sure that you go to the second page and correct anything that you have there. Let's see here. Okay. And then you would actually save that. And then again here with the next step, what are we missing? Okay, I didn't get everything here. So it's kind of picky here. What's our balance due here? 195.90. Let's try that. Okay, everything else looks good. So now we can save it. And if we go next, and then here's where we get the agree. And then click next again. And here's where you see your e-file button. And that will go ahead and send that. It'll send it to Atrix, and they will actually do the filing for you. All right, I'm going to. All right, so I'm going to switch back now to the PowerPoint here. All right, so we're back on this other screen. One other option that is kind of a last resort. So if you find some mistakes in the system that cannot be corrected with audit setup activity, that cannot be corrected, or I'm sorry, that cannot be corrected with another check, or a voided check, or a recalculation, or a change to the pays, deduction, or employee, then your last resort will be to go in under Tools Options and turn on your audit setup activity. And with that open, you can make changes directly on the employee record. That may or may not fix your problem on your quarterly report. I think you may have to contact us if that doesn't help. If none of the other troubleshooting options help, just contact us and we'll walk you through this part. This is something that you don't want to leave turned on, but it is helpful if it's a last resort as far as correcting something. All right, so some tips and reminders before we're done for this morning. Make sure that everything has been posted for the quarter again. Make sure that you're on the current version of Sage. And lastly, make sure you have a good backup of your payroll files. And not just the backup that's being made in the middle of the night. Have something that you've created that's a backup of those files before you close the month, even before you close the month into the new quarter. Something that you back up using tools, file tools, and maybe you save it to your desktop so it's easily accessible. Sometimes restoring those backups from a nightly backup can be difficult to get all the parts. And using tools, file tools, picks up all the pieces of those data files during the backup, and they're easily restored. All right, so we have a couple minutes. So we'll wait for a minute or two, and if you want to enter your questions, if you have questions right now, put them in the chat area of the webinar, and Tina will read them out to me, and I'm happy to answer now or re-demonstrate something to you if you want me to go back. Additionally, if you think of something later, if you want to send an email to Tina, she can forward those on to me, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Not seeing any questions at this point.
Okay. Should we give it just maybe another minute? Nothing so far?
Nope, nothing.
Okay.
You did a pretty good job.
Okay. Then I think we'll go ahead and stop the meeting. And I hope this was of help to everybody. Again, if you think of anything later, or if you have any troubles going through the quarter end yourself, please just give Tina an email, and she'll be happy to forward that on to me. So have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you in a future session. Thanks.